Now that my stack looks good, let's go over to driver and try actually using it. So the first thing I'll do is I'll put in a main method. Well, actually before that I should probably resize my windows a little bit. And let me close out the interface. We don't really need that anymore. And then I'll move my other window down here so I can be looking at my implementation at the same time I'm looking at my testing code, right? So I know what's where. So over here, the first thing I'm going to end up doing is putting in a main, right? I need some place to actually start my program off. So I'll go public static void main, then I need my one argument, right, which is going to be the parameters, and then I'll set things up with the curlies. Once I'm inside this main, I can think about creating an ArrayStack object, right, something to work with, something to test. So what I'm going to write is this. I'm going to write stack ADT of type integer. Notice that I'm not talking about my ArrayStack implementation just yet. Remember that our goal from the previous slides is to write programs in terms of the interface, not in terms of the class that implements the interface, right? Not in terms of that concrete implementation. I just want to work in terms of the interface. So the actual variable type here isn't going to be ArrayStack. It's going to be stack ADT. And over here I'll call this stack, or actually let's just call it S. It'll be less to type. And I'll set this equal to here will be a new array stack of integer. I can use a default constructor. That should work out fine for me. Let's compile this really quick, and that works out fine. So again, the key is I want to work in terms of the interface, so my type for the stack variable is going to be stack ADT. And then when I do this new here to actually create the object to store inside that variable, that's when I'll refer to my concrete class. That's when I'll refer to ArrayStack, right? And that's the object I'm going to build and then store it into this variable, which is just in terms of the interface. Now that I have my array set up, I can start using it to see how this thing works. So let's go over and let's do a stack and let's do a push. So let's throw on the number 5 and maybe the number 15 and let's see the number 7. Let's compile this, run it. Hopefully everything works. We don't get any errors or output. And so that looks fine. We didn't get any output over here in our window. Everything looks good. But we don't really know what was stored in there. So let's actually try popping something off. So let's go over here and we'll go system.out.println and we'll go s.pop. So here maybe this code is a little bit complicated. But what I'm doing here, right, is I'm doing a print, and I'm doing that print directly on the result of going to that stack and doing a .pop, right? So I could have stored that result from the stack into a variable first, but I'm not going to bother with that. I just want to see what it is. So let's compile this and run it. Maybe stop for a second and see if you can figure out what value that should be. So running it, hopefully get back a 7. And that's what we get. We get a 7 back. Let's actually duplicate this line out. So let's do this 2 more times. Compile this, run it, see what we get. 7, 15, 5. So you can notice, right, that we pushed on 3 things, right? So 5 would have been at the bottom of my stack, followed by 15, followed by 7. And then when we popped those off, we saw them in reverse order, right? The last thing we pushed on was a 7, so the first thing we pop off is a 7. After that, there's just a 5 at the bottom and then a 15 on top. So when we do another pop, that 15 is going to be displayed. At that point, there's only one thing left. There's just the 5 left. So my other pop is going to pull that thing off. So everything looks good. That seems to be matching up. Let's try peek really quick before we call it a day. Over here, we're going to just type in, let's just go peek. And we'll just do it. We'll do it 3 times, I guess. Doesn't really matter. Twice would have worked just as well. Let's compile this, see what we get back out. Here we run this. And notice here we get 777, right? So remember with peek doesn't actually remove anything from our data structure, right? It doesn't remove anything from the stack. It's just telling us, oh, this is the thing that's on top. Well, since 7 is the last thing that I pushed on, it's just going to show me 7. And since there's no kind of side effect, right, it doesn't change the state of the stack, right, what's available to me, it's just going to do that 7 and take it and print it 3 times in a row. So that pretty much covers our stack. There are kind of some more tests we could do. Right now, it looks like our push and our pop are working fine, as well as our peek. What we don't have really tested is this expansion, right? So normally I would need to maybe write some additional code to make sure this expand cap is working. You know, I could write something like a loop that loops 500 times and adds a bunch of things, right? Just to see whether it works or it crashes. And of course, we didn't get to test the other three things, right? The is empty, the size of the toString, because those haven't actually been implemented. Fortunately, or unfortunately, you'll have a lot more time to work on this stuff because in your homework, you're going to be asked to implement these things. So that about wraps it up for our implementation of a stack using arrays. In the next chapter, we're going to go and do kind of the same thing again, but we're going to introduce a new idea, right? Instead of using arrays, we're going to use something called linked structures to implement the same thing, right? The same ADT, but in a more efficient way.